The florist called at 9:30 on a Wednesday morning in late April while I was loading the dishwasher in my kitchen in a suburb of Portland, Oregon, and I almost did not answer because I was in the middle of something, and the number was local, but not one I recognized, and I have a policy about not answering calls from numbers I do not recognize during the workday. But something made me pick up. Maybe the particular brightness of the spring morning coming through the window above the sink. Maybe the fact that I had been feeling unusually optimistic about things that week for no reason I could articulate. Maybe just the randomness of impulse that determines half the significant moments in a life without anyone understanding why. I picked up the phone and I said hello, and a woman's voice on the other end said, "Is this Jennifer?" And I said yes. And she said, "Hi, Jennifer, this is Amanda from Petal and Stem calling to confirm your wedding flower order for Saturday, May 18th. And I want to make sure we have the delivery address correct." And I stood there in my kitchen with a plate in one hand and my phone in the other, and I said, "I think you have the wrong number. I am not getting married." There was a pause on the other end of the line, the kind of pause that contains a person rapidly searching through information trying to figure out where the confusion is. And then Amanda said, "Oh, I am so sorry. Let me double check. Is this Jennifer Carver?" And I said, "Yes, but I am already married." And she said, "Oh," and there was another pause, longer this time. And then she said, "Well, this is awkward, but the order is under Jennifer Carver. And the groom's name is listed as Michael Carver. And the ceremony is scheduled for May 18th at the Evergreen Estate and Vineyard. And I have you down for white roses and peonies for the bridal bouquet and boutonnieres for the groom and groomsmen. And I just wanted to confirm the delivery time." I put the plate down on the counter very carefully because my hands had started to do something I did not entirely control, and I said, "What is the groom's phone number on the order?" And Amanda said, "Well, I am not really supposed to give out that information, but given the confusion, maybe I should just call him directly to sort this out." And I said, "No, please, just tell me the number." And she read it to me, and it was my husband's cell phone number. Michael and I had been married for 6 years. We lived in a neighborhood called Laurelhurst in northeast Portland, in a house we had bought together 4 years ago after saving for 3 years before that. One of those Portland houses with a front porch and a maple tree in the yard, and enough space for the life we had been building together, which included 2 careers that we both cared about, and a plan for children that we had been discussing seriously for the past year, and a black lab named Rocket, who was currently asleep on the couch in the living room. Michael was a civil engineer who worked for a firm that designed water treatment facilities, and he traveled sometimes, maybe 1 week out of every month, to project sites in Washington and Idaho and occasionally California, trips that had always seemed completely ordinary and that I had never questioned, because why would I question my husband going to work? I was a high school English teacher at a school in southeast Portland, and I loved my job in the way that people love jobs, that feel like they are contributing something meaningful to the world, even when the world does not always make that easy. And Michael and I had what I believed was a marriage that worked, not in a dramatic rom-com way, but in the steady, reliable way that marriages work when both people are committed to making them work. When you have inside jokes and shared routines and a general sense that you are on the same team, moving in the same direction toward a future you both want. I said to Amanda, who was still on the phone waiting for me to say something, I said, "Is there a bride's name on this order?" And she said, "Yes, her name is listed as Jennifer Hawthorne." And I said, "Can you tell me anything else about the order?" And Amanda said, and I could hear in her voice that she was beginning to understand that something was very wrong, and that she had accidentally walked into the middle of it. She said the order was placed 6 weeks ago, and the total is $4,200. And it was paid in full with a credit card I do not recognize the name on, but I am looking at it now and it says M. Carver. And I said, "Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate your help. This is not your fault." And she said, "Do you want me to cancel the order?" And I said, "No, do not cancel anything. I will handle it." And I hung up. I stood in my kitchen and I looked at my phone and I thought about what I had just heard, and I did a thing that I am not proud of but that I do not regret, which is that I opened the browser on my phone and I typed in Michael Carver and Jennifer Hawthorne in Portland, Oregon, and wedding. And the first result that came up was a wedding website. One of those free sites that couples make to share information with their guests, with a domain name that was some combination of their names and the year. And I clicked on it and it loaded, and there at the top was a photograph of my husband with a woman I did not recognize, both of them smiling at the camera, with the particular kind of smile that people have when they are in love and are not afraid to show it. and below the photograph was text that said Jennifer and Michael are getting married. May 18, 2024. Evergreen Estate and Vineyard, Portland, Oregon. Please join us as we celebrate our love and begin our life together. I scrolled down. There was an Our Story section that said Michael and Jennifer met 3 years ago at a conference in Seattle, where Michael was presenting on sustainable water infrastructure, and Jennifer was attending as a representative of the environmental nonprofit where she worked as a development director, and they started talking at a reception and did not stop talking for 4 hours, and exchanged numbers and started what they both knew immediately was going to be something that lasted. There was a section about the venue with photographs of the estate and details about the ceremony and reception. There was a registry linked to a department store I recognized. There was a schedule of events for the weekend, including a rehearsal dinner on Friday night and a brunch on Sunday morning. There was a section for RSVPs, and when I clicked on it, I could see that 63 people had responded yes, and 14 had responded no, and 8 had not responded yet. I put my phone down and I walked to the living room, and I sat on the couch next to Rocket, and I put my hand on his head, and he opened one eye and looked at me and then closed it again. Because as far as he was concerned, everything was fine, and I sat there for I do not know how long. Long enough for the light in the room to shift slightly. Long enough for my breathing to go from shallow and fast to something slower. Long enough to move through the first wave of shock into the second wave, which was not shock anymore, but a kind of cold, focused clarity that I recognized from other moments in my life, when something terrible had happened, and my brain had responded by becoming extremely practical. Michael was at work. He had left that morning at 7:15 the way he always did, kissed me on the forehead, said have a good day, called Rocket over to say goodbye to him too, because Michael never left the house without saying goodbye to the dog, and walked out the front door and gotten into his car and driven to his office in Northwest Portland, where as far as I knew he was currently sitting at his desk working on a water treatment facility design for a city in eastern Oregon. I looked at the time. It was 9:53. I had 23 minutes before my first class started, and I needed to be at school by 10:30, which meant I needed to leave the house in 15 minutes, and I needed to figure out what I was going to do with the information I now had, whether I was going to call Michael immediately, or wait until the end of the day, or wait until I had more information, or wait until I had a plan. I decided to wait. I decided that walking into a classroom of 32 high school juniors and trying to teach them about the symbolism in The Great Gatsby, while my brain was doing what it was doing, was probably not possible, and that I needed to call in sick, which I did, texting my department head and saying I had woken up feeling unwell and needed to take the day, and she texted back immediately saying, "Feel better, we will cover your classes," which was the kind of response that happens when you are a teacher who does not call in sick often, and who has built up enough goodwill that people do not ask questions when you need a day. I sat on the couch with my phone in my hand, and I went back to the wedding website, and I looked at it more carefully this time. The photograph of Michael and Jennifer at the top of the page had been taken outdoors somewhere with mountains in the background, maybe somewhere in the Columbia River Gorge, both of them in casual clothes, jeans and sweaters. The kind of photograph that looks effortless, but that actually requires someone to take multiple shots until they get one where both people are smiling at the exact same moment, in the exact right way. Jennifer was pretty. She looked to be in her mid-30s, younger than me by maybe 5 or 6 years, with long dark hair and a warm smile, and the kind of face that you would describe as kind if you were trying to describe it to someone else. She looked like someone I would probably like if I met her at a party. She looked like someone who believed that the man standing next to her in the photograph was available to marry her. I clicked through every page on the website. I read every word. I looked at every photograph. There were pictures of them hiking, pictures of them at what looked like a winery, pictures of them with other people who I assumed were friends and family, pictures of them with a golden retriever that I had never seen before. There was a page about the wedding party with names and photographs of bridesmaids and groomsmen, and I recognized one of the groomsmen as someone Michael worked with, a man named David, who I had met twice at company events, which meant that people Michael worked with knew about this wedding and were participating in it, and had presumably been told some version of a story about Michael's life that did not include me. I looked at the schedule. The rehearsal dinner was in 2 days. The wedding was in 9 days. 9 days from now, my husband was planning to marry another woman at a vineyard 25 miles outside Portland, while I was presumably going to be at home thinking he was doing whatever he had told me he was doing that weekend, and I realized I did not even know what he had told me he was doing, because we had not talked about that weekend yet, which meant he had not yet constructed the lie he was going to tell me to explain why he needed to be gone for an entire weekend in the middle of May. I opened my laptop and I started searching. I searched for Jennifer Hawthorne, Portland, Oregon, and I found her LinkedIn profile immediately, which confirmed what the wedding website had said, that she worked as a development director for an environmental nonprofit called Green Rivers Coalition, which I had heard of because it was one of the more prominent environmental organizations in the region. Her LinkedIn said she had been in that role for 4 years. Before that, she had worked for another nonprofit in Seattle. She had a degree from the University of Washington. She looked professional and accomplished and completely normal, which is what made all of this worse, because it meant that Michael had not been living some secret double life with a person who existed in the shadows, but had built a second entire relationship with a real, accomplished, visible person who had a job and friends and a LinkedIn profile, and who was planning a wedding at a venue that cost money and that required deposits and that had a website you could find with a single Google search. I searched for the venue. Evergreen Estate and Vineyard was real. It was a wedding venue in the hills outside Portland that specialized in outdoor ceremonies and had a website full of photographs of other couples getting married there, in front of views of mountains and vineyards, and the kind of golden hour light that makes everything look like a painting. I clicked on the pricing page and saw that venue rentals started at $8,000 and went up from there, depending on the season, and the day of the week and the services included, which meant that Michael and Jennifer had spent serious money on this, had put down deposits, had signed contracts, had committed to this in ways that went far beyond just saying they were engaged. I looked at the date again, May 18th. I opened my calendar and looked at what that date meant in my own life, and saw that it was 2 weeks before the end of the school year, which was always an extremely busy time, and that I had noted on that day that I had parent-teacher conferences scheduled for the following week, and needed to prepare materials, which meant that I would have been distracted and tired, and not paying particularly close attention to what Michael was doing, which was maybe not a coincidence. I called my sister. Her name is Kate, and she is 2 years older than me, and she lives in Seattle and works as an attorney for a firm that does employment law, and she is the person I call when something has happened that I cannot process on my own, because Kate has a way of listening to things that sound insane and responding to them as though they are problems that have solutions rather than disasters that have no exit. She answered on the second ring and said, "Hey Jen, what is going on?" And I said, "Kate, I need to tell you something, and I need you to not say anything until I am finished, because if you say anything, I am going to start crying. And I cannot start crying yet, because I need to figure out what to do." And she said, "Okay, I am listening." And I told her everything, the florist, the phone call, the website, the woman, the date, all of it. And when I finished, there was a silence on the other end that lasted long enough that I thought maybe the call had dropped, but then Kate said, "Jen, are you absolutely sure that this is real and not some kind of mistake or joke?" And I said, "I am looking at a wedding website with Michael's face on it, and 63 people have RSVP'd yes, so yes, I am sure." And she said, Okay, here is what you are going to do. You are not going to talk to Michael yet. You are going to collect every piece of information you can find first. You are going to document everything. You are going to take screenshots. You are going to make a list of every question you need answered, and then you are going to decide what you want the outcome to be. And I said, "Kate, I do not know what I want the outcome to be. I found out about this 45 minutes ago." And she said, "I know, but you need to start thinking about it now, because the conversation you have with Michael is going to determine what happens next, and you need to be in control of that conversation, and not the other way around." I spent the rest of the day doing what Kate told me to do. I took screenshots of every page on the wedding website. I saved every photograph. I made a list of the wedding party members and searched for them online to see if I could figure out how they were connected to Michael or Jennifer. I found 3 of the groomsmen had LinkedIn profiles that listed Michael's company as their employer, which confirmed that people from his work knew about this. I looked up Jennifer Hawthorne on every social media platform I could think of and found that her Instagram was public, and that she had posted regularly about her relationship with Michael for the past 3 years, photographs of them together at restaurants and on hikes and at events, captions about how grateful she was to have found him, how excited she was about their future, how much she loved planning their wedding. I looked at the dates of her earliest posts about Michael and calculated back, and realized that if the wedding website was accurate about them meeting 3 years ago, then that meant Michael had started seeing Jennifer approximately 6 months after he and I bought our house together. 6 months after we had sat at a table in a title company office and signed a mortgage and talked about paint colors and furniture and the maple tree in the front yard and what kind of garden we wanted to plant. 6 months after we had looked at each other and said, we are really doing this, we are really building a life together, and I had felt the particular solid happiness of a person who has found what they were looking for and does not have to keep looking anymore. I found a photograph on Jennifer's Instagram from 2 years ago, a picture of her and Michael at what looked like a holiday party, both of them in formal clothes, her caption saying grateful for this man and this life, and I looked at the date December 15th and opened my own phone's photo archive, and went to that same date and found a photograph I had taken of Michael and me at my school's holiday party, both of us smiling, my caption saying best date ever, and I realized that we had been at different parties on the same night, and had both posted photographs with captions about being grateful, and that somewhere between those two parties, Michael had driven from one to the other, and changed clothes and become a different version of himself, and that nobody at either party had any idea that the other party existed. I made a timeline, I opened a document on my laptop, and I started writing down everything I knew in chronological order. 3 years ago, Michael meets Jennifer at a conference in Seattle. They start dating. They date for presumably several months, while Michael is also married to me, and we are living in the house we just bought together. They continue dating. Jennifer posts about him on Instagram. They go hiking, they go to wineries, they spend holidays together. At some point, Michael tells Jennifer he wants to marry her. He proposes. She says yes. They start planning a wedding. They book a venue. They make a website. They send invitations. 63 people RSVP yes. A florist gets an order for $4,200 in flowers. And in 9 days, they are getting married unless something stops them. I looked at the document I had created, and I thought about what Kate had said about deciding what I wanted the outcome to be, and I realized that I did not just want Michael to not marry Jennifer. I wanted to understand how this had been possible, how a person could live 2 completely separate lives with 2 completely separate people and maintain both of them with apparently no visible stress or contradiction. How many lies that required, how much planning, how much energy, and what kind of person could sustain that without something breaking. At 3:30 in the afternoon, I heard Michael's car in the driveway. He was home early, which was not unusual on Wednesdays. He often left work early on Wednesdays to go to a gym near our house, and I heard the front door open and I heard him call out, "Jen, you home?" And I said, "Yes, I am in the kitchen." And he came in and he was wearing his work clothes, khakis, and a button-down shirt. And he looked at me and said, "I thought you had class this afternoon." And I said I called in sick. And he immediately walked over to me and put his hand on my forehead and said, "Are you okay? Do you have a fever?" And I said, "No, I am fine. I just needed a day." And he said, "Okay, well, I am glad you are resting. Do you need anything?" And I said, "No, I am good." And he kissed the top of my head and said, "I am going to change and go to the gym. I will be back in a couple hours." And I said, "Okay." And I watched him walk out of the kitchen and up the stairs, and I listened to his footsteps on the floor above me. And I thought about the fact that he had just touched me with the same hands that had presumably held Jennifer Hawthorne's hand, while looking at wedding venues and signing contracts and planning a future that involved another woman entirely. After he left for the gym, I went upstairs to his office, which was the smallest bedroom in the house that we had converted into a workspace for him, and I sat down at his desk and I opened his laptop. I knew his password because we had never had any reason to hide passwords from each other. We had shared passwords to everything, bank accounts and email and streaming services, because we were married and married people share passwords, because married people have nothing to hide. Or at least that is what I had believed until approximately 6 hours ago. The laptop opened and I went to his email and I searched for Jennifer Hawthorne and found 3 years of correspondence, hundreds of emails, messages about meeting for dinner, messages about weekend plans, messages about loving each other, messages about the wedding, messages about honeymoon plans, and I sat there reading them one by one, watching the record of an entire relationship unfold in front of me in chronological order. And what struck me was not just that the relationship existed, but how ordinary it was. How much of it was just the regular back and forth of 2 people who care about each other and are trying to coordinate their lives and make each other happy. The same kind of messages that Michael and I sent to each other, except with Jennifer's name instead of mine. I found an email from 4 months ago in which Michael wrote to Jennifer saying he had told his family about the engagement, and they were thrilled, and his mother wanted to meet her, and I had never heard Michael mention Jennifer to me, and I had certainly never heard him tell me his mother wanted to meet someone new, which raised the question of what exactly he had told his family, and whether they knew about me, or whether he had constructed a version of his life for them that did not include me either, or whether this was even more complicated than I was capable of understanding at that moment. I found an email from 2 months ago in which Jennifer wrote to Michael saying she was excited to move in with him after the wedding, and asking whether they should start looking at apartments now, or wait until after the honeymoon, and Michael had written back saying, "Let us wait until after. I want to enjoy the wedding first, and then we can figure out the rest." And I realized that Michael had been planning to move out of our house, and had not mentioned this to me, and had presumably been planning to tell me something at some point, or maybe he had not been planning to tell me anything, and had simply been planning to leave one day with a story about a work trip and never come back. I closed the laptop and I sat in his chair and I looked around his office at the books on the shelves and the photographs on the walls, photographs of us on our wedding day and on vacations and with Rocket when he was a puppy, and I thought about how Michael sat in this chair every day working on his engineering projects and sending emails to Jennifer about wedding plans, and how those two things had apparently existed side by side with no contradiction for 3 entire years. I went downstairs and I sat on the couch, and Rocket came and put his head in my lap, and I sat there with my hand on his head, waiting for Michael to come home, and not knowing yet what I was going to say to him when he did, but knowing that I had 9 days to figure out what was going to happen on May 18th, because Michael was not going to marry Jennifer Hawthorne, not if I had anything to do with it, not because I wanted him back, but because Jennifer deserved to know the truth before she married someone who was already married to someone else. Michael came home from the gym at 6:15, and I was in the kitchen making dinner, which was something I had decided to do, because I needed to be doing something with my hands, and because I needed everything to look normal until I had decided what normal was going to look like after tonight. He came in through the back door the way he always did after the gym bag over his shoulder, face flushed from exercise, and he walked over to where I was standing at the stove and kissed me on the cheek and said, "Something smells good." And I said, "I am making pasta." And he said, "Great, I am starving. I am going to shower." And he went upstairs, and I stood at the stove stirring pasta sauce and listening to the water run in the bathroom above me, and thinking about the fact that in 9 days, this man was planning to stand at an altar in front of 63 people and marry a woman who had no idea he was already married. I had spent the 2 hours while he was at the gym making a decision about what I was going to do, and the decision was this. I was not going to confront Michael tonight. I was going to wait until I had contacted Jennifer Hawthorne and told her the truth, because I had decided that Jennifer deserved to hear this from me before she heard it from Michael, before he had a chance to construct a story that made me the villain, or the crazy ex, or the woman who would not let go, and I wanted her to see the evidence with her own eyes, the marriage license, the photographs, the house we owned together, the life we had built, all of it, so that when Michael tried to explain this away, she would already know what the truth looked like. I ate dinner with Michael that night, and I was calmer than I expected to be, not because I had accepted what was happening, but because I had a plan, and having a plan made the situation feel less like drowning, and more like swimming toward something, even if I did not know yet what the something was. Michael talked about his day, about a meeting with a client that had gone well, about a design problem he was trying to solve, and I listened and asked questions and responded in ways that were appropriate, and he did not notice anything different about me, because people see what they expect to see. And Michael expected to see his wife having a normal Wednesday evening dinner with him, and so that is what he saw. After dinner, I told Michael I had papers to grade and went upstairs to our bedroom and closed the door and sat on the bed with my laptop and opened a new email and addressed it to Jennifer Hawthorne at the email address I had found on the Green Rivers Coalition website. I wrote and deleted and rewrote that email 7 times before I found the version that said what I needed it to say without saying so much that it would sound insane. The final version said, "Dear Jennifer, my name is Jennifer Carver, and I believe you are engaged to my husband, Michael Carver. I am not writing this to cause you pain, but because I think you deserve to know the truth before you marry him. Michael and I have been married for 6 years. We own a house together in Portland. I am attaching copies of our marriage license and recent photographs. I would like to speak with you if you are willing. I understand this is shocking, and I am sorry to be the one to tell you. I sent the email and I attached 3 photographs, one of our wedding day, one of Michael and me from 2 months ago at a restaurant celebrating his birthday, and one of our marriage license which I had photographed from the file cabinet in Michael's office where we kept important documents. Then I closed the laptop and I sat on the bed and I waited. Jennifer replied 47 minutes later. Her email said, "I do not understand. Who are you? Why are you sending me this? Michael is not married. I think you have the wrong person." I wrote back immediately and said I do not have the wrong person and I can prove it. And I gave her my phone number and said, "Please call me. I know this does not make sense yet, but I can explain everything." She called 11 minutes later, and I went into the bathroom and closed the door and turned on the fan, so Michael would not hear me if he came upstairs, and I answered and said, "Hello, Jennifer." And she said on the other end of the line in a voice that was shaking, she said, "I do not know who you are, but this is not funny." And I said, "I know it is not funny. I am not joking." Michael and I have been married since June of 2018. We live at 2847 Laurelhurst Drive. We have a dog named Rocket. He works for Patterson Engineering. He told me he was going to the gym tonight, and he came home an hour ago, and he is downstairs right now watching television. And there was a silence on the other end, and then Jennifer said, "I need to see you. I need to see proof. I need to see all of it." And I said, "When?" And she said, "Now. Tonight I live in Southeast Portland near Hawthorne Boulevard. Can you come here?" And I said, "Yes, give me the address." I told Michael I needed to run to the store to pick up something for school tomorrow, which was not even a creative lie, but Michael did not question it, because Michael had apparently become very comfortable with lying, and assumed everyone else was equally comfortable with being lied to. I drove to Jennifer's address, which was a small apartment building on a side street off Hawthorne, and I parked and texted her that I was outside, and she texted back the apartment number. And I went up and knocked, and she opened the door, and we stood there looking at each other for a moment. 2 women who had never met but who had been living parallel lives with the same man for 3 years without knowing it. Jennifer looked smaller in person than she had in photographs, more delicate somehow, and her face had the kind of shock on it that I recognized from having seen it in my own mirror that morning. The look of a person whose entire understanding of their life has been rearranged in a matter of hours. She said, "Come in," and I came in, and her apartment was small and neat and filled with the kind of furniture that young professionals buy when they are trying to make a first apartment feel like a home. And there were wedding planning materials everywhere, magazines on the coffee table, fabric swatches on the couch, a binder labeled "We Deading" in neat handwriting sitting open on the kitchen counter. Jennifer said, "Show me everything," and I opened my phone and I showed her. I showed her photographs of Michael and me on our wedding day. I showed her photographs from vacations we had taken together. I showed her photographs of our house. I showed her our marriage license. I showed her text messages between Michael and me from that very day. I showed her our joint bank account statements. I showed her everything I had, and she looked at all of it without saying anything. And then she sat down on her couch and put her face in her hands, and I sat down next to her, not close enough to touch her, but close enough that she knew I was there, and I waited. When she finally looked up, she said, "I do not understand how this is possible. We have been together for 3 years. I have met his friends from work. I have talked to him every single day. He proposed to me 6 months ago. We have been planning this wedding together. How is this possible?" And I said I have been asking myself the same question since 9:30 this morning, when a florist called to confirm the flower order for your wedding, and I did not know your wedding existed. Jennifer looked at me and said, "A florist called you?" And I said, "Yes. She must have pulled up the wrong contact. She called my number instead of yours and asked me to confirm the delivery address for the wedding flowers." And Jennifer said, "Oh my God, oh my God." And I said, "I know." And she said, "What are we going to do?" And I said, "I think we need to figure out what he told each of us and whether there are other things we do not know yet. Because if Michael has been capable of maintaining 2 complete relationships for 3 years, then I do not think we know the full extent of what he is capable of." We spent the next 2 hours comparing our timelines. Jennifer told me everything she knew about Michael, and I told her everything I knew, and we started to see where the gaps were, where he had told one story to her and a different story to me, where he had used the same events with different explanations, depending on which version of his life he was living. When Michael told me he was traveling for work, he was often with Jennifer. When he told Jennifer he was visiting family, he was often with me. When he told me he was at the gym, he was sometimes at the gym and sometimes with Jennifer. When he told Jennifer he needed to work late, he was sometimes working late and sometimes having dinner with me. The trips he took for work were real, but he extended them by a day or two on either end and used that time to see Jennifer. The business conferences he attended were real, but he brought Jennifer to some of them and me to none of them, and told his work colleagues that Jennifer was his partner, and apparently none of them had ever questioned why the woman he brought to conferences was not the same woman they might have met at the occasional work event I had attended. Jennifer said, "Did he ever mention me to you?" And I said, "No, never, not once." And she said, "He never mentioned you to me either. He told me his previous relationship had ended badly and he did not like to talk about it." And I said, "We did not have a previous relationship that ended. We have a current relationship that he is apparently still maintaining while planning to marry you." Jennifer said, "I feel like I am going insane. I feel like nothing I thought was real is actually real." And I said, "I know exactly how you feel because I have been feeling that way since this morning." I asked Jennifer what she knew about Michael's family, and she said she had never met them. He had told her they lived in California, and they were not close, and they probably would not come to the wedding. And I said his family lives in Salem, which is 45 minutes from here, and we have dinner with them once a month. And they definitely do not you exist, because his mother called me 2 weeks ago to ask what we were doing for Mother's Day. Jennifer put her face in her hands again and said, "I cannot believe this. I cannot believe any of this." And I said, "I know." And she said, "What do I do? Do I cancel the wedding? Do I call the venue? Do I tell people?" And I said, "I think first we need to confront him together so he cannot tell different stories to both of us separately, and so we can both hear whatever explanation he thinks he has for this." Jennifer said, "I do not want to see him. I do not want to be in the same room with him." And I said, "I understand, but I think we need to do this together because if we do it separately, he will have a chance to prepare a defense, and I think we need to see him when he is caught and has not had time to prepare anything." Jennifer looked at me for a long time, and then she said, "Okay, when?" And I said, "Tomorrow. I will tell him we need to talk, and I will ask him to come to the house after work, and you will be there, and we will confront him together, and he will have to answer both of us at the same time." I drove home at 11:30 that night, and Michael was already asleep, and I got into bed next to him and lay there in the dark, thinking about the conversation that was going to happen the next day, and what I wanted to say, and what I wanted to hear, and what I thought was going to happen after. I did not sleep much. I lay there and listened to Michael breathing next to me, and thought about the fact that this man had kissed me goodbye that morning, and gone to work, and come home and gone to the gym, and eaten dinner with me, and watched television, and come to bed. And at no point during any of that had he shown any sign of stress or guilt, or the weight of maintaining 2 complete lives. And I wondered if that meant he was very good at compartmentalizing, or if it meant he was something else entirely, something that did not feel things the way other people feel things. The next morning, Michael left for work at his usual time, and I called Kate and told her what I had done and what was going to happen that afternoon. And Kate said, "Are you sure you want to do this? Are you ready for whatever he is going to say?" And I said, "No, I am not ready, but I do not think there is any version of being ready for this, so I am just going to do it." I called in sick to work again, which was going to raise questions at some point, but that was a problem for future me, and present me had more immediate problems to deal with. I texted Michael at lunchtime and said, "We need to talk tonight. Can you come home right after work? It is important." And he texted back, "Is everything okay?" And I said, "We just need to talk." And he said, "Okay, I will be home by 5:30. Jennifer arrived at my house at 5 o'clock, and I let her in, and we sat in my living room and did not talk much, because there was not much to say that we had not already said the night before, and because we were both nervous about what was about to happen. Rocket came over to investigate Jennifer, and she petted him and said, "He is sweet." And I said, "Yes, he is. He is a good dog. He does not deserve any of this," which was a strange thing to say, but it was what I was thinking. Michael's car pulled into the driveway at 5:35, and I heard his keys in the front door, and he called out Jen, and I said, "We are in the living room," and he came around the corner and stopped when he saw Jennifer sitting on the couch. He looked at her, and then at me, and then back at her, and his face did something I had never seen it do before, a complete erasure of expression, a blankness that was more frightening than shock or anger or guilt, because it suggested that the person I was looking at had just turned off whatever it was that made him recognize human connection and had become something else. I said, "Hello, Michael. I would like you to meet Jennifer Hawthorne, your fiancée." She and I have had a very interesting conversation, and we have some questions for you." Michael did not move. He stood in the doorway between the hall and the living room, and he looked at both of us, and I watched him do what I can only describe as a series of rapid calculations, trying to figure out what we knew and how much we knew, and what story he could construct that would allow him to escape this moment intact. Then he said, "I can explain this," and I said, "I am sure you think you can, but I do not think there is an explanation that is going to make this make sense, so maybe you should just tell us the truth." Jennifer stood up and said in a voice that was shaking, she said, "You told me you were not married. You told me your previous relationship ended years ago. You told me we were building a life together." And Michael looked at her and said, "I am so sorry, Jennifer. This is not what it looks like." And I said, "Michael, it is exactly what it looks like. You are married to me. You are engaged to her. You have been lying to both of us for 3 years. There is no version of this that is not exactly what it looks like." Michael sat down on the arm of the chair across from us, and he put his hands on his knees, and he looked at the floor, and he said, "I never meant for any of this to happen." And I said, "That is not true. You absolutely meant for this to happen. You made choices every single day for 3 years to make this happen. You planned a wedding. You booked a venue. You sent invitations. You maintained 2 complete relationships with 2 different women at the same time. And you did all of that very intentionally, so do not tell me you did not mean for it to happen." Jennifer said, Why would you do this?" And Michael looked up at her and said, "I loved both of you. I love both of you. I did not know how to choose, and I thought I could make it work." And I said, "You thought you could make it work by marrying her while staying married to me." And he said, "I know how that sounds." And I said, "It sounds like you are a person who thought he could have everything he wanted without regard for anyone else. And I need you to understand that you have destroyed both of our lives. And you did it because you were selfish. And nothing you say right now is going to change that." Jennifer said, "Did you ever love me?" And Michael said, "Yes. Of course I did, I do." And she said, "Then how could you do this? How could you plan a wedding with me knowing you were married to someone else? How could you stand there and watch me plan our future knowing it was all built on a lie?" And Michael did not have an answer for that, or if he did not say it. He just sat there looking at her with an expression that might have been regret, or might have been something else. I could not tell anymore because I had stopped believing I knew how to read him. I said, "Michael, you need to leave. You need to leave this house right now, and you need to figure out where you are going to live because you are not staying here." And Jennifer said, "And you are not coming to my apartment." And Michael said, "Where am I supposed to go?" And I said, "I do not care. You can go to a hotel. You can go to your parents. You can go anywhere, but you cannot stay here and you cannot see either of us until we figure out what we are going to do legally." Michael stood up and said, "Can we talk about this?" And I said, "No, there is nothing to talk about right now. You lied to both of us for 3 years, and we need time to process that and figure out what comes next, and you being here is not going to help anything." He looked at Jennifer and said, "Jennifer, please." And she said, "Do not talk to me. Do not call me. Do not contact me. I need you to leave me alone." And he looked at me and I said the same, "Go now." And he went upstairs and I heard him moving around in the bedroom. And then he came down with a bag, and he walked to the front door and turned and looked at both of us, and opened his mouth like he was going to say something, and then closed it and left. Jennifer and I sat in the living room after he left, and neither of us said anything for a while. Then Jennifer said, "What do we do now?" And I said, "I think you cancel the wedding and I file for divorce, and we both figure out how to rebuild our lives from this point forward." And she said, "I do not know how to do that. I do not know how to tell people. I do not know how to explain this." And I said, "I do not either, but we will figure it out because we do not have any other option." Jennifer left an hour later, and before she left, she said, "Thank you for telling me. I know that did not benefit you in any way, and you could have just let me marry him and dealt with your own situation separately, but you chose to tell me the truth, and I will never forget that. I said I told you because you deserved to know, and because I do not think women should keep each other's secrets when men are the ones lying." And she hugged me and left. And I sat on the couch with Rocket, and I thought about everything that had happened in the past 36 hours, and how a single phone call from a florist had unraveled 3 years of lies in less than 2 days. Michael tried to call me that night, and I did not answer. He tried to call Jennifer, and she did not answer. He sent both of us texts saying he wanted to explain, he wanted to talk, he was sorry, and neither of us responded, because there was nothing he could say that would change what he had done, and nothing he could explain that would make it make sense. Jennifer canceled the wedding the next day. She called the venue and the florist and the caterer, and she sent an email to everyone who had RSVP'd yes, saying the wedding was canceled due to unforeseen circumstances, and she did not provide details because the details were nobody's business but her own. I filed for divorce the following week. Michael did not contest it because what was he going to contest? The fact that he had been planning to commit bigamy, the fact that he had maintained 2 relationships simultaneously for 3 years. There was no defense for any of it, and his attorney apparently told him to cooperate fully, which he did. The divorce was finalized 4 months later, and I kept the house, and Rocket and Michael moved to Seattle, which was probably the best decision he could have made, given that everyone in Portland who knew about what he had done was not particularly interested in seeing him around. Jennifer and I stayed in touch, which might seem strange to some people, but made sense to both of us, because we were the only 2 people who really understood what it felt like to have been deceived that completely by the same person. And I think we both needed someone who could validate that we were not crazy, that what had happened had really happened, that we had not imagined the scale of the deception. I think about the florist sometimes. I think about Amanda from Petal and Stem, who called the wrong number on a Wednesday morning in April and accidentally exposed a man who had been living 2 lives for 3 years. I think about how much effort Michael had put into keeping those lives separate and how all of it came apart because of a single phone call that was supposed to go to one Jennifer and went to a different Jennifer instead. I think about all the small choices that have massive consequences. The decision to answer a phone call from a number you do not recognize, the decision to look at a wedding website, the decision to send an email to a stranger, and how any one of those decisions could have gone differently. And I might still be married to Michael right now, not knowing that he was planning to marry someone else in a matter of days. I am not grateful for what happened, but I am grateful that it happened when it did, before Jennifer married him, before they had children, before the lies got so complicated that untangling them would have destroyed even more lives than they ultimately did. I am grateful that Jennifer and I chose to work together instead of working against each other, because I think that is rare and important, and something that more women should do when they discover that the men in their lives have been lying to them. If you are listening to this and something about it feels familiar, if there is a part of you that has been wondering whether you know the whole truth about your life, I want you to trust that instinct, because instincts exist for a reason, and the reason is usually that some part of your brain has noticed something that your conscious mind has not caught up to yet. Answer the phone call from the unknown number. Ask the questions that feel uncomfortable. Look at the things you have been avoiding looking at, because they might reveal something you do not want to know. Because living in a truth that hurts is better than living in a lie that feels comfortable until the day it does not. Leave me a comment and tell me what you would have done in my situation. Would you have told Jennifer, or would you have handled this differently? Would you have confronted Michael alone or brought her with you? I am genuinely curious because I made decisions very quickly, and I do not know if they were the right decisions, but they were the only ones I could see at the time. And if you are new here, subscribe and turn on notifications because there are more stories like this one. Stories about women who discovered things they were not supposed to discover and decided to speak instead of staying silent. And I think those stories matter, and I think they need to be told. I will see you in the next one.